So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Thanks so much for joining the second peer learning session for the CLTN. I think everyone who knows who I am, but just to remind you, I'm Shelley from Cambridge, and I have the privilege of curating this growing, amazing network of people. So yeah, I'm just here to welcome you to the peer learning session. I'll just start with a bit of housekeeping. As you'll have seen, we are planning on recording this. So if you do ask a question, you'll be on the recording. Please do use the chat function at any time to ask or comment or add additional information as you see fit. If I can ask those of you who aren't speaking to remain muted during the duration of the presentation, that will just help with the recording. So I'll just quickly start by saying, yeah, we are at the second of the peer learning sessions, and the aim of these is to offer monthly sessions in the lead up to our summer symposium, which is now only 3 months away in Kruger National Park. And if you've yet to register, I encourage you to do that now. So the aim of these sessions is to provide a space for our members to give an overview of the program's design, curriculum, lessons, shared challenges, and then with a space to have a Q&A at the end. So I am now going to hand over to Nigel Asquith, if I may. He's the director of the Kinship Conservation Fellows. He's a new member of the CLTN, and he's going to give us an overview of his program. So I'm going to hand over to you, Nigel.
Great, thanks, and hi everybody. Given that we're this is going to be a peer learning rather than me talking, hopefully I won't talk for too long, but I do have a presentation, so I'll get that up and running. Let's see if this works. Can you see that? Great. Okay. So going to talk about Kinship Conservation Fellows. I know a couple of people I see here on this have been teachers in the program, and we've got a fellow on the line. So hopefully we can have a little discussion. And so those of you who know the program well, please feel free to jump in. So I'm going to tell you about this program that I've been directing for just over 10 years now. And I think in a nutshell, we're teaching conservationists to be leaders, which is what we're all about. But often I ask myself, and I think actually I'd prefer this if the program was more like this, teaching leaders to be conservationists. And I think we're very much in this boundary space between the core skills that people need to be to be leaders, and the kind of what we call the technical core skills versus how do you actually become a leader? How do you lead organization? So we'll talk about how we balance that in the Kinship program. But to basically start off, it's interesting to look at Kinship's mission: to develop a community of leaders dedicated to collaborative approaches to environmental issues with an emphasis on market-based principles. There's a couple of things I've highlighted there. Really, our goal is to develop a community of leaders. It's not to teach leadership. It's not to teach core skills. It's to develop a community of leaders. And our idea of collaborative approaches goes back a long way to when Kinship started, when conservation was very much about litigation, especially in the United States, where it was all about, the Sierra Club has a lawsuit and wins, and we win a few and we lose a few as environmentalists, but very, very antagonistic. We've moved a lot on in the last few years, obviously. But we still are of the belief and the practice that collaboration is really the way to go in conservation. And then the kind of twist on Kinship leadership, which few, if any, other organizations do, is that we really focus on markets. And of the core skills we teach in Kinships, it's all about market-based principles. So we kind of have 3 components to our programs. We teach early career leaders, some of whom eventually become leaders, some of whom eventually participate on our fellowship program. But that's then kind of a standalone program. We call them regional workshops. I'll go into a little more detail later on. Our main core signature program is mid-level leaders, mid-career people. We've trained more than 300. That's people about 30 to 40 years old from around the world. We have an in 1 month residential training program in Bellingham, Washington State every year. And then once those mid-level leaders have been through the program. Obviously, they have much of their careers still ahead of them. We do a lot of mentoring, follow-up, building the community, and basically helping build the community as the community goes forward as conservation leaders, and how do we build and help build off each other and help off each other. 314 fellows, 58 countries, 7 continents are where we're at now. I think we'll get a few more countries into our program this summer. We've got another 18 fellows coming, already selected for the month of July. So sooner or later, it'll be up to 330 something fellows, with a few 60 countries, I'm guessing. So before we go into more about the kind of philosophy of the program, I will tell you where we are in terms of the core things we believe. And over the 10, 20 years now we've run the program, I've been heavily involved for just over 10 or 12 now. We've concluded that these 6 pillars, basically, and much of our teaching, if not all of our teaching, revolves around the idea that to become a conservation leader, you need to basically think how these 6 ideas, these 6 pillars can be incorporated into your conservation program. As a sidebar, we're not zealots about markets and business and everything have to be economically viable, but we're zealots about the idea that that is how you get sustainable conservation. So any sustainable conservation is great. We've just concluded over the years that building economics and building finance and building initiatives into conservation strategy planning is the kind of way to make conservation sustainable. Actually, let me ask one question. I have a big I have 5 people's pictures on the side of my screen, so I actually can't see the whole screen. Do you get that, or do you see my screen clearly?
You see your screen clearly.
Okay, perfectly. I'm seeing Fred, I'm seeing Nathan, I'm seeing you. Okay, well, never mind. I'll just have to guess what's on the far right then and hope I get the right thing. So, and I don't know how I get it out, but never mind. So anyway, those are our 6 pillars: leading adaptively, iterating for scale, designing for governing the commons, identifying economic engine, financing your conservation, and then evaluating for impact. I'm going to go into those in a little more detail one by one. But I'll start off with the fundamental core of our conservation kind of belief, which is leading adaptively is the core skill that many, if not most, conservationists don't have when they come to our program. Some have it intrinsically. Many can learn it, but not all can learn it, or not all can use it. So our starting point is that leading adaptively is the way to go. Adaptive leadership, for those of you who don't know, comes out of a line of thought from Ron Heifetz from the Kennedy School at Harvard, has written a number of books and worked with a lot of folks at Kennedy School, spun off and developed a private company that really focused on adaptive leadership. And you'll see here basically what that comes from. And all this is on our website if you want to take a look. But I'm just repeat, so I won't do it all. I'll just mention a couple of things which I think are crucial. But again, this challenge of our first pillar in some respects is the challenge that we think is one of the crucial ones across the board of conservation. That markets and incentives can help solve many conservation problems. They promote collaboration rather than conflict. And then the crucial point, though, is, however, most environmental challenges are complex and cannot be resolved just by resorting to technical expertise. So this is a starting point of our whole program. You can't solve conservation programs because you learn those core skills at university about how to monitor, how to evaluate, how to measure wildlife, how to do a payments for ecosystem services program. You have to figure out that leadership skills about figuring out how to work with people, how to collaborate, how to psychology, how to promote behavior change. This is what will, on what basis conservation will live or die. And so many of us in the conservation space don't have an idea what this is about, and certainly haven't been taught in it. So this idea of adaptive leadership is a fundamental part, if not all, of our program that runs through the entire month and through our entire mindset. So much of what we teach, much of what we develop, and much of what we focus on throughout a fellow or a conservationist career is getting them to think adaptively. One of the case studies we talk about in adaptive leadership is a very commonly known conservation case. the first major payments for ecosystem services program in upstate New York, the Catskills Mountains. Super famous case. Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows the technicalities of how downstream people were convinced by the New York City that some of their water fees should be going to upstream conservation, transformed the Catskills, made a sustainable landscape, saved the city, I don't know how many billions of dollars. So it's a kind of a technically well-known example, and everybody knows the basics of, you do the economics, you figure out the cost, opportunity cost evaluation. But we delve into the story of the fellow who led this, a guy named by Al Appleton. And we've been through the entire process and hit those, and with the fellows talk through the crucial bifurcation points when you could have done this or you could have done that, and then you get to another point, you could do this, you could do that, and what happened in terms of leadership. How did the leaders in this situation work with each other, bounce off each other, fight with each other, build coalitions, all that type of stuff, to eventually get to a win-win in which the city saves 8 billion and the Catskills become a much more sustainable landscape. So it's kind of going beyond those technical solutions. Oh, all we need to do is a payment services program, we're all set. No, that's the technical thing. It's very straightforward. The adaptive leadership that you need to do to get there is the secret. And the adaptive challenges, the getting on the balcony and looking out and figuring out how the landscape around you is working, what the different stakeholders are saying and doing, that's a skill few of us are ever taught. So we really focus on this in Kinship. That's our first pillar, and as I say, it goes through the entire program. Second pillar is basically iterating for scale. And here we're basically saying to fellows, look, no matter how small your project is, if you keep small, then the world will have burned, will be toast by the time you finish your conservation career. So you have to be thinking about how we get conservation solutions to scale. And that doesn't mean to say your project needs to be big. It can just be simply, if you're doing a small project, make sure you've learned from what other people have done, and you get your solution in a format that can teach other people, even if your example is small, how they can learn from it, how they can do better, how they cannot repeat your mistakes. So the idea that everyone, no matter how small your project, can contribute to the idea of we build a body of knowledge which one thing learns off another, and we basically iterate as a community, either individually or as a community. We're thinking about iterating for scale all the time, because if we don't, we'll be toast by the time anyone gets us to the end of their career. And one of the examples we talk about is, in this case, is island conservation, where we've learned, or they've learned over the years, very simple solution. If you want to stop extinction, the most cost-effective, quick way of stopping extinction is focused on small islands. Small islands are the problem. Usually the problem is introduced alien species. Get rid of the alien species. On here, the simple one on the left, you see that we've got rid of I think it was rabbits in this case. On the left, the rabbit's still rolling free. On the right, the rabbits are out, so the vegetation's coming back. Simplest, quickest, most effective way of doing of preventing extinctions in the world is getting invasive aliens off small islands. It was a small project island conservation did to start. They did it small, they learned from it, they iterated, they did it better, they did it again and again and again, and now they've given other people the idea. The idea of small things, if they're thought through right at the start how to iterate, you can get to scale relatively quickly by just repeating. So again, this is one of the pillars. It goes through the program. We talk about it a lot. Different people come in and talk about it. Third pillar, talk about Eleanor Ostrom's Tragedy of the Commons, how if we incorporate the principles of sustainable management of common pool resources, we can move forward, involving communities right from the start, but basically figuring out how to get community-based management up to scale. I know a lot of people here have thought a lot about this. The big example we go through, John Mason used to teach this, now Rebecca Azari teaches it, the CREMA program in Ghana, which basically aligned the traditional chiefs' use and ownership of land in Ghana with the needs of wildlife, with the needs of making money, get all those stars in alignment, make sure you're following Eleanor Ostrom's principle for governing the commons, and you can align your incentives to get conservation done effectively. I'll just go through these other ones pretty quickly. Identifying economic engine, another, obviously we're talking about markets. How do you identify what is going to drive your conservation in the long term? Probably won't be philanthropy. It's got to be payments and services, or tourism, or game watching, or whatever. Figure out early what that can be. And we do teach kind of some core skills. We do give examples of these different models, but the idea is teaching the fellows how they can go in and figure out it for themselves in their context. One of the case studies we use in the identifying economic engine is this idea of water. Water can drive conservation because people are always very, very interested in protecting their upper watershed to make sure they get conservation of that watershed, to make sure that water comes downstream. This case is in Bolivia, where I work, where we're basically helping local people with projects with that's barbed wire, so helping them manage their cattle, planting trees, honey production, whatever, but always in exchange for a conservation commitment. So in this case, we're using water as the economic engine for conservation. And sometimes for conservation, it isn't necessarily intuitive that there are many things that can pay for conservation rather than conservation of biodiversity itself. So again, one of the fundamental principles. Financing conservation, okay, you figured out in one case it's water, it might be carbon, it might be tourism, it might be something else. What do we actually do? How do we fit out sorry, I'm moving forward. How do we actually turn that idea that water is your economic engine? How do you actually do the financing? How do you set it up? Is it impact bonds? Is it long-term investments? Is it sub-market? Is it below market rates for loans? Is it philanthropic? Is it whatever? We use the case. One of the cases we look is the Great Bear Wilderness on the Pacific Northwest, where carbon financing is basically helped create a huge conservation program led by the First Nations, financed by the carbon tax, I think it is in British Columbia. And one of our fellows actually runs that program. So we have her, Cornelia, come in and teach that every year. Then the final is basically, once you've done this great conservation, you need to be evaluating. You need to figure out if it really is as great as you think it is. And so how do you evaluate for impact? How do you work on evaluation process? We never, as conservationists, focus on having a counterfactual. What's our effective counterfactual? So we really focus, another component of the program, on evaluating for impact. How do you do rock solid evaluation to actually see if everything you're doing works and see if you're actually having the impact you hoped you're having. One of the examples we use there is, again, in Bolivia, we've done some randomized control trials. We've got other people doing randomized control trials in Uganda. How do you set up monitoring evaluation system that works? I'm going to stop here for a second and ask if there's any questions from where we've gone so far. Oh, I'm going back. Any questions, comments at this stage?
I've got a meta question, Nigel.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the big thing that, and that was a really helpful overview. The thing that really strikes me, and in thinking about also this network and some of the things we'll be talking about in Kruger, and the way you frame the presentation about developing conservation leaders. Most of these pillars, if I look at these pillars and I look at the examples you gave, it is mostly about the technical work, right? It's about designing conservation work, thinking about markets, thinking about how to scale models, right? The more that I, just personally, and also in Molly Silly's work, the longer I work in conservation, the more that I feel that, especially when we talk about leadership, the challenges organizations face in doing more conservation work actually have to do with running organizations and growing organizations and managing growth. And it's incredibly relational. I mean, that's what I spend like all my time on now is, relationships inside or outside the organization. And I just wonder, how has Kinship approach this? Like, you kind of evolve from this technical focus and interest on markets and incentives. But when you talk about growing leaders, I feel like there's a lot, or most of it is really beyond the technical realm. It's not about designing the conservation work.
Yep.
There's so much great conservation work out there in the world, and and innovation around all these ideas that you're describing. But leading organizations, growing organizations, running fantastic organizations, that seems, again, to me, where a lot of the challenge is and where a lot of the leadership development energy is going. So I just wonder what's been kind of the thinking, the evolution.
Yep.
how you manage those things within this framework and this curriculum that you've developed.
That's a great question, and to be honest, I want to kick that can down the road till the end of the presentation. But to quickly answer that, I think the way we've done it is be teaching leadership throughout the whole program. Whenever we're talking about any of these 6 pillars, obviously the first one, but the rest of it we're talking about, and how leadership, decision making, how the leaders took those roles, what happened, how the stakeholders were involved. That I think is something we're constantly incorporating. But I think if you think of it on the spectrum of a program that teaches your basic skills, that might be your undergraduate program or your master's program, and then the far end of the spectrum is what you would be doing, Fred, the Malasili, the organizational development. How do you get organizations to work in teams and be great organizations? If you look at that spectrum, I'd say Kinship's right in the middle. It's doing a bit of the left-hand side and bringing people from the far left of we know all core skills. Oh, but we're not getting very far doing conservation. Malasili is teaching you how do you do conservation by building a great organization. We're that moving people across from that technical to think strategically and think organizational. And I think that we've identified these 6 pillars, and as you're right, there's a lot of technical stuff in there, but for example, the iterating for scale. Yes, there's a lot of technical thing that goes in there, but it's the leadership vision of saying we need to think about scale for the better of the community, and we need to start now thinking about scale rather than thinking about it as going on. So I think we're in the middle of that spectrum. But I think it's a great question. That's why I'm here, and that's why I'm interested in you guys of thinking how do we get all our different leadership programs across that spectrum. How do we make sure that they're building off and on one another, and getting rid of the competitiveness, build and the the repetitiveness, the redundancy, and making sure we can complement each other in a clear pathway. I think that's what I'm interested in. So I think that for the peer learning, I'm telling you what we do, and hopefully over the time we'll figure out what everyone else does and see where we all fit in that spectrum. Shall I keep going? Anyone else? Technical question? Yeah, I'll keep going. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Fred. We find that in the program, we don't start at all with market tools. We spend the first week talking about leadership. And what we found is it takes people 3 or 4 or 5 days to get off this, hey, I'm a conservationist, I know stuff technically, and to get them out of that headspace of, oh, we got a technical solution here. I just need to do a carbon project and we'll be all set, or I just need to do an evaluation and we'll be all set. Get out of that space, realize you know nothing or very little or there's so much still to learn as a leader. Get out of the technical space, and then let's start again. And that's how we start the whole program. So once we then get into pillars 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, people are out of the space of I'm a technical conservationist. They're in the space of, oh, I'm a leader, and all about leadership is I know nothing to start leading, and we'll figure it out as we go along type thing. Okay, but let's get moving, else we won't finish. So I kind of mentioned, and sorry for all the text, and no need to read it. But basically, we kind of have 3 stages in our process. The first one is what we previously called regional workshops. We take these kinship ideas we've done Kenya, India, Mexico, South Africa, 5-day little thing in which we're teaching 20 to 30-year-olds, let's just broadly say that, on the basics. Most of that is going to be your technical, some of those later pillars of how to use markets, how to use incentives, et cetera, et cetera. Then the Greenhouse Signature Program, I've mentioned it, it's the mid-level leaders who are at this stage of, hey, I already know this technical stuff, but there's something out there I'm not quite getting yet. There's something bigger out there. I'm not satisfied where I am. I'm using some quotation marks there deliberately, and those quotes come from, I forget the name of the study, but I know a lot of you guys were involved in this study a couple of years ago. I've got the citation of the study somewhere, which they did an analysis of all the leadership programs. Brett, I think, led it. and Nora, and I'm sure many of you guys were involved in it, so I won't claim to know many more of the study than you guys do. But a lot of these quotes in this are based on my reading of what was concluded as the needs for conservation, what's missing, where we should go, what should be done next, and saying that actually what Kinship has been doing fits into some of those supposed missing holes, and we're trying to build that. So I've done these quotes to actually show that what we're doing really fits in with what that global universal study showed was kind of the missing piece. But we'll get into that in a minute. Post-program, we mentor the fellows who by then are experienced conservation leaders. Obviously, we've had fellows such as Elizabeth Singleton, you know, Fred, who was a fellow 20-something years ago. So we have some very senior people who were Kinship Fellows now. And of course, we have very young people at Kinship Fellows. So we've got this broad community of different people at different levels, and we try and mentor them as go along. We do peer learning, et cetera, et cetera. This, as I mentioned, is one of our 5-day quick things. This was in South Africa, in the Drakensberg. We taught 35 relatively young, under 30s, just easing them into the idea of what kinship and market tools and incentives and some level of adaptive leadership is. But then that leads into our major program, which I'll spend a few minutes telling you about the program. This is just gives you a sense of who we're teaching. Who we're teaching is mainly women, actually. These are the core data from the cohorts from 2014 to 2023. It's 18 fellows from around the world, a month in Bellingham, Washington State. 4 a month is our basic offering. So it's just over 50% women. Then we're looking at, as you see in the middle circle, those the orange and the red, the orange and the light orange, are basically people between 30 and 40. So we're getting 60% of our program is that age group. In the interest of time, I'll go through. You can read what these are. Then this is interesting. The mix of years of experience, again, that we're getting, the vast majority of people are getting between 7 and 15 years experience. We've got people from around the world. Interestingly, we're getting less and less Americans coming to our program, and more African and Latin Americans. So again, this leads to us thinking about how we might change things as we go along. That's your demographics. And just I'll just give you a couple of highlights of to our fellows coming in this cohort to give you the sense of the range of people we get. Dan is going to be coming as a fellow this year. He's head of conservation partnerships and protected areas, Canadian Wildlife Service. I don't know his age. He must be about early 40s or very late 30s. He's one of the more, how would I say, senior people who would be in a cohort. He's over 40. So we're always, how would I say, if someone's over 40, we really do a little more detail of, you know, then outside our key group, should they be in, should they be out, et cetera, et cetera. Then in contrast of Dan, who will be on the senior edge of our cohort, of our 18 fellows this year, Canadian, we have Verly, who's very young. I'm not even sure if she's quite 30. So she's going to be the youngest of our cohort this year. But she leads the Missoul Foundation, runs an organization, basically a 60-person organization. Interesting, and this goes back to my first point. She's not even a conservationist. She's not a conservationist. She's not a scientist. She's a psychologist. But the idea of teaching Verly, helping her manage her conservation organization, is the type of thing we want to do. And you see, going back to Fred's question, and this is our balance, Verly probably doesn't know a lot about conservation. If she's that young, and she hasn't done the training and the course, she probably needs some bumping up to get that basic conservation. But really what she's struggling for, as she told me when I last talked, is how do you manage an organization? So we got to balance those two things for our cohort. And I say it's between 30 and 40-year-olds are our key group, as it were. So, and again, I'm going back to this, the conservation leadership capacity building, the landscape study, which I know many of you people were involved in, and going back to, again, quoting what that report said was needed and what we actually do. So we teach collaboration, monitoring, evaluation, communication, self-awareness, innovation, creativity, how to collaborate. That's our core message. right? And how people do that. We have the 1 month mid-career fellowship. It's trips, it's field trips, it's learning from experience, group problem solving. We do a lot of group problem solving. The 5-day workshops for the early careers is similar format, but obviously less intense. Then we have literally 4 days on adaptive leadership. We have an adaptive leadership coach who coaches many people outside the conservation space and focus on basically making self-aware people, which is perhaps the most interesting and most necessary space or need in the conservation space. So again, at the bottom, as I say, this core program, our core signature program, there's some skills in there, but it's mainly leadership, but teaching leadership with the examples of those skills that everyone in the conservation space knows about, be it the New York City Catskills or the Great Bear or the payments, whatever it is. We teach the leadership embedded within those conservation examples, as it were. Then as we go kind of post-program, we do the teaching and the mentoring of the skills. We're building the community. We're having as many kind of convenings from our previous fellows. We actually, in those, going back to the first phase, which is the 5-day programs in country, they're taught by fellows, primarily by fellows. So the fellows do the teaching of the next generation. And then we at least have 10 or 15 fellows from previous generations come back and teach our major program in Bellingham. And then after the program, fellows interacting with each other, building community, talking about learning from each other. So we kind of trying to build this community. And obviously by now, you know, after the first year of the program, there's only 18 fellows. Second year, there's 36. Difficult to build a cohesive, useful community when there's 36 of you. But now, 20 years on, there's 314 of us. I was a fellow in 2005, by the way. So we're building this concept of literally, and obviously I'm in a very privileged position because I run the program. I know where everybody is. So if I'm going to Bangalore next week, okay, I'll just go and see the 4 fellows there. Oh, this is great. I'll go to whatever. And then and while I'm traveling, we then say, well, if Nigel's going to be here, why don't we have a get together with the fellows? And then we talk about this and we get some things going of some projects, some people working on stuff, etc. So it's building this community. I would say if there's a problem at this stage, the leap is to get it out of Nigel knows where the fellows are to everybody knows where the fellows are, and we start those interactions amongst themselves. We're getting there, but it's a process and people need nudging to keep going on that track. Then this final kind of post-program thing, for just an example, one of our fellows, Elizabeth Diego, is a manager in the Water Resources Authority in the Kenyan government. In 2021, Kenya introduced some new regulation of how to create a conservation levy, how water users should pay for conservation. Elizabeth knew there's so many people in the kinship community who know how to do this type of thing. So rather than having to hire consultants or ask one of the big international NGOs to come and help, she could then go to the network, go to the community, say, hey, I got this problem, can you help me with that? We mobilized 14 fellows, brainstormed how to do it, and then we went back to her team with a brainstormed plan of how we could help her, what could be done, etc., based on the experiences in the US, in Bolivia, in Peru, in Brazil, etc., etc. So it's proved to be a very quick and easy way to get that. Yeah, I think it's a bit try the whole South, getting people learning from their peers rather than learning from teachers, as it were. So that's it. That's who we are. Every few years we get together and get as many of the fellows. This was our last get together we're up in Seattle again. I think we had about 100 of the 300 fellows were able to come. And again, building community. So going back to the first slide I gave you, we're trying to build a community of leaders focused on collaboration as a way to solve conservation problems, using markets and incentives to get conservation. But as we've evolved over the years, if you can imagine way back in 2001, when Kinship first started, it was very, very much the technicalities of, you know, how do you do a market, how do you do an evaluation? Why, and maybe even more importantly, why would you even want to do markets for conservation? Why would you even think about it? So some of the philosophy of the economic, the invisible hand. And then the kind of second iteration of Kinship was all about, okay, we accept that, and the world is beginning to accept using markets and incentives for conservation. What tools can you use? So again, building those skills, it's cost benefit models, it's calculating opportunity cost, etc., which you know, Kinship in 2009, they spent about half the program teaching basic economics. We spend like a day on that now. So we've evolved hugely with the idea that in 2009, no conservationists knew how to do cost-benefit analysis. In 2024, people have studied it in their masters, so we don't need to repeat it. And so we move on from that, what was taught. So then by 2013 and 14, we were in the stage of, well, we know why people would want to use markets and incentives. We know why, we know what tools you can use, but let's learn about, okay, we got some experience now. So we then 5 years of case after case after case. What's worked in New York? What's worked in Ghana? What's worked in Kenya? Case study after case study after case. And during that 5-year period, we also learned, you know, leadership is getting more and more important. And then we transitioned even further away from the philosophy, the tools, the cases to leadership. And now in this kind of 5-year iteration of Kinship, we're all about scale and sustainability, and that requires the leadership teams. So that's where we're going in this phase. I'll leave it here and open it for questions, or hopefully more discussions than questions. Because if you want questions, you can ask me individually about the program, or we got a lot of stuff on the website. So thanks.
Nigel, hi, I'm going to jump in. It's Kitty.
Oh, please, Kitty, yeah.
I couldn't see where to put my hand up, so I'm just jumping in. But yeah, I really liked the framing. It's sort of, I think it's evolved a little bit since I did Kinship, but it encapsulates my experience of Kinship. But I suppose, so as listening to you, I was sort of thinking, actually the technical content is almost like a vehicle for the leadership stuff. And it for me personally, it felt a bit like a Trojan horse, because I went there thinking, oh, I want technical. I was craving like technical market skills. I wanted to learn about Red Plus and all sorts of stuff. And it was that first phase that you talked about was slightly disconcerting when I realized it wasn't really about that. And you were actually trying to look at us as leaders. But then all of that, all those technical stories and experiences became kind of vehicles for the more transformative leadership content. And that was almost like a process. We were kind of unpicking all of the examples and stories that we heard and analyzing it from a kind of leadership perspective. So I think it's not, I think I made the comment earlier, it's not evenly weighted across all of those pillars. That leadership piece is sort of the overarching content throughout the whole thing. So it's not really a question, just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't have a question, but I'll just say a quick comment. I liked hearing about the 2 new fellows that are joining. And one thing we've learned over the years running the master's program at UW-Madison is it's oftentimes the people who don't come from the technical scientific background that offer so much creativity to our learning as a team. And I'll be curious at some point to find out how that all plays out with the student, but we've just found those diverse backgrounds. They ask great questions. They kind of keep us on our toes, thinking outside the very traditional space of conservation. So we've always appreciated having that as part of our learning environment at UW-Madison.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Some of our most amazing people have come to in a very strange way. And again, I think one of the weaknesses of our program, too many NGO conservationists in the program. I want a private sector finance person to come for the month. I want a government guy or lady from Bhutan to come for a month. The government folks, and especially the private sector folks, don't come. And it's desperate, because those are going to be our conservation leaders. Those are the ones who can transform the way we do conservation. If we're just talking amongst ourselves, our NGO types, we're preaching to the choir. And I think this is something that we're trying to do, but failing miserably to get that diversity. And I don't know why it is. I think one hypothesis, which New York City banker has a month to spend in Bellingham. Maybe we should make it in a nicer place, perhaps. I don't know, but yeah, what do we do about that? And I don't know. And this is one of the reasons why we tried these 5-day things, to see if we might get a different demographic as people. Now we're choosing the younger demographic, but maybe one of these 5-day things in the United States for finance people. So that type of thing we'll be looking at. But incidentally, Nathan, I'll be in Madison next week where Kinship is actually based. So we should talk.
Yeah, I'm leading a training next week, a different training, interesting training. But I'll be around, and it would be great to meet if you're in town.
Yeah.
And I did not know Kinship was based here.
We can see the state building from our office, so we're downtown.
Nigel, how are you guys, as your alumni community grows and as that network, and as you said, it's, you know, people are becoming more senior, people are moving on to more senior positions over time, which is what you want to happen. How are you leveraging that network? Because it's a pretty large, potentially powerful network. Yeah.
I will answer that by again saying that's one of our problems. It's not we're failing on this. We're not doing very good. But I will answer it in a proactive way of what I'm thinking in terms of, and I'm guessing we all run our programs and we all have the same question of how do you keep your alumni, students, fellows, whatever you want to call them, engaged in that community. And we wrestle with it, and we spend so much time as a foundation building community, helping them run exercises, helping them, you know, the fellows run the newsletter, the fellows do this, the fellows do that, but it just doesn't stick. It's so difficult. And I think the basic difficulty is we're all so busy by definition as conservationists. We've all got 100 things to do, and we need 40 hours in the day, and we only have 20, and we can't do it. So anything that isn't aligned with your job description or isn't aligned with saving that patch of forest or that bird or whatever that you have to do today, else it will die, just gets on the wayside. And unfortunately, working to build your community, that would be strategic. That's the strategic way. I've got a problem. I don't know how to save this bird species today. I'll ask the network and engage with the network and get it out there. That's the strategic solution. But the reality of us working in this space is no, I'm too busy doing it to actually big question. So I don't know. I don't know, Fred. We invest as much as we can and we haven't cracked it. I guess I'm in charge of noticing hands. Ricardo, do you want to say something?
Thank you. I appreciate your comment about keeping the community engaged, because it's good to know that we are not the only ones struggling with that, with ideas. My question was related to what it takes to be accepted in the program and how you balance it out to not make it super exclusive, so you're ruling out people you want to have in the program.
Good question. I think again, something we don't do well, we're reactive. We accept applications, as it were. So if amazing people apply, we get amazing people. If no one applies, we get nobody. We don't do enough, I don't think, formally going out. In contrast, for example, if you want to be a Malago fellow, you're headhunted by the Malago Foundation. They look for you, they come and interview, and they sweep the landscape looking for great people. We don't, we just accept who applies. So I think we get so many. One big way we take decisions about who comes in is fellows recommendations. So if someone was a fellow and we thought they're an amazing fellow and they recommend someone to come along, then that weighs a lot. But we have a very exhaustive process. We have 3 rounds of selection, in which basically the first round is previous fellows, people like Kitty, someone who was a fellow, ranks the application. And then once that gives us down to a short list of about 50 people, then we have a committee that looks at all those applications and ranks them again. And then once we get down to about last 20, 25, we actually interview those 25 and make the final selection. So it's exhaustive, and we're limited, and we try to be really creative. And there's escape routes. If someone didn't, make it through that first phase, there's a method we can get them up if they're looking interesting, creative, don't fill the standard criteria of 15 years in conservation or whatever. But I would love to get more of those non-traditional people. We don't get them because we don't go out and headhunt them, and they don't apply, and I don't know why. I think I saw Mar. You had a question. Going back to Fred's point of how do we engage the community, though, I think we would say the get-togethers. Okay, yeah, I'll do a little longer answer than what I thought, and go back to what I was saying. The difficulty is getting people, once they've been away from the program, once they're not in that community, to get them to engage. And I think the crucial thing is how to make it worth their while. And the road to hell is paved with good intention. Everyone joins the committee. Everyone says, I would love to be on the newsletter. Everyone says, I would love to do this. Then the reality is, nothing against them, they don't. Why? It's because they're too busy with all the other stuff in it. So what we've learned is that these, what we call the regional workshops, which is a bit of a misnomer, but these 5 days things in Kenya, South Africa, Mexico, wherever, and we can do it around the world. Our first criteria of where we go and do that is, where is a country where there's a particular conservation need? So for example, in South Africa, we said, well, look, great market-based conservation going in South Africa, but it's very white-led. We need to get non-whites into this picture. So we said, first thing we need to do, start bringing up the next generation of non-white conservationists. How do we do that? We're going to workshop and get them. So that was the conservation issue we identified as needing some help with. But then we taught that program with by 5 or 6 of our South African fellows. So what we found there is Kinship nudged those 5 or 6 fellows to say, hey, how about we run this training program for the next generation? Of course, they'll, yeah, I'll do that. So it's a week-long investment. It's a very clear. And when you get 5 or 6 people, some of whom knew each other previously, some didn't. It was different cohorts. It was for the 2010 cohort, the 15 cohort, the 2021 cohort. So basically bringing them together and saying, we've got a problem we need to solve in the room this week, which is teach these 30 people. And that focuses the mind hugely. And it's a very time-bound engagement. We gave them some money to doing it, a bit on around. So it was getting those 6 people with a particular task to do that they knew they could do, and they could do it well, and it was a need. And we paid them, we covered their cost of it. So suddenly then, it's not this ethereal, hey, we're a community, and let's be nice and get to know each other. It's, you got to teach these people 5 days, let's go. And that really engaged those people. So suddenly we've taught the next generation, and now we have 6 or 7 of our South African fellows who are way closer than they used to be. They've lived and cried and taught these people, and they've solved problems. They've been on a field trip, and then suddenly they're talking, and they say, well, we could do this together. And before you know it, we now have a little node of South African fellows who are working together on projects and doing them and building that South African fellows community. All we've done is nudge them to help us teach the next generation. You do that in South Africa, Kenya, Mexico, Colombia, and where do we have 7 or 8 fellows in each country? As I say, it's those countries plus Colombia, it's Mexico, it's Madagascar, it's getting to be Indonesia, it's the Philippines. So we can do these programs around the world. And I think that's the way we're going to build up. It's not a global community. It will be a Philippines kinship community, and an Indonesian, and a South African, and then they will coalesce together. That's what I think can work. That's what we've tried to do. And then it makes your global community difficulty much smaller, because you're trying to create a Philippines community right now. I think that's where I go. We've shown it can work. We just need to repeat and repeat and repeat.
Just on that alumni point, I mean, maybe something to throw out to this group too is thinking about events like the World Conservation Congress. And you know, when you've got these alumni networks from places like Cambridge, alumni networks from places like Kinship, you got a lot of people, you know, and these are big conservation spaces where thousands of people come together. And it might be nice to really have that sense of the kind of, you know, entrepreneurial energy that you have with these groups and rising leaders. And you know, I know this group had talked about, I think maybe we even did, and it was the Marseille conference, right? There was something on conservation leadership at that one, but that was all online because it was during the pandemic. But anyway, there's some untapped power in these growing networks, and how to harness them is a useful question to think about, not just for individual programs too.
Yeah, 100%. And we do that. We're just planning. We're going to have a big kinship presence at the Cali COP. And how do we do that? And how do we build on stuff? So yeah. I think, yeah, and for us, for the finance part of it, how do we take advantage of a meeting where 3 or 4 fellows are already going to be there? We put a little funding to put in money for 3 or 4 more to come, and then the other people to join in. Before we know it, we've got a serious grouping. So it's being strategic in those decisions about where and when to bring together the community.
Great. Are there any more questions for Nigel?
Let's see, Nina, you've been a kinship teacher. What was your experience? Tell us what you thought about and meeting those fellows, and what should we be doing?
Well, a couple of things that stand out to me. It was really interesting to see your demographic slide, because I didn't know kind of what was behind the curtain. I mean, just judging the people in the room, it's sometimes hard to tell. As we're thinking about having more people in conservation, having more people working effectively, a lot of our programs, a lot of our fellowship programs are bringing in kind of these younger folks, right? But I think there's kind of an untapped resource in keeping folks in conservation longer, perhaps, or just retaining them, period, right? We know it's hard work. We know there's burnout. We know these things. And so I've been thinking a lot about sustaining who we've already invested in and who we've been working with, and enforcing and reinforcing resilience. And something that strikes me looking at your demographics, and while there's not many programs for mid-career, so there's already that, and then checking that box. But I almost wonder for some folks who even came up early or earlier, where market-based solutions were not even really on the radar. I think I took environmental economics my senior year of undergraduate. I think I got a C-. I wasn't really interested in learning about the OPEC oil and how that worked, but like, there's some elements to your program that I actually think would resonate with almost advanced career individuals. And could we use tools like this, programs like this, to also sustain and boost resilience in those who we've already been making investments in? And this is a little opposite than what this group often hears me talking about, is like, we keep reinvesting in the same people over and over. But I am recognizing this when you have people that are in conservation and their ability to catalyze others. And that's something I actually wrote in my notebook that you started out saying is, are these people in kind of positions to influence or to be catalytic, either by scaling their project or passing on what they know, are influencing or motivating other people? So you're not just investing in one person or working with one person, you're actually indirectly influencing the work of maybe 5 or 10 others. And then you start to get some scaling opportunities. And I think people who are more advanced in their career have wider networks, and you could potentially have this kind of training really flow through them and into potentially others, and start getting the scaling effect that we're trying to teach, and really emboldening those folks to be the scalers themselves. That's what stands out for me. And it's only 7:55 in the morning, and I'm not even on my team.
Sorry to pick on you.
Sorry.
But linked to that, Nina, we, for example, as I mentioned, this guy, of the 2 examples I give you of the next cohort, we got Dan, who I imagine is 42, 43. That's about where we're. Anything older than that, I'm looking seriously. That's an old person. But obviously they're not really. But the question of, they've been in long enough that they're gonna stay. Someone like Dan is old enough that he has 5, 6, 10, 15 people he's working very closely with. So yes, how do you get that multiplier effect and pick those people? And so, for example, if it was a young person, 30-ish, we wouldn't hold it against them that they weren't already managing 15 people. But if we're getting a candidate we're thinking about, and they're 44, one of our questions is, how many people are actually director management, and how many people are influencing right now? And if the answer is not many, then that discounts against them, because we're looking for return on investment.
We have a coined phrase in my workplace at the Smithsonian: training the next generation. And we love that. We love to say that. It rings so nicely. And I find it a little arrogant, because it kind of assumes that the current generation is doing a great job already. And so what about those of us who are in a position to make a difference today with our actions? And we all need a little bit of help, because the field of conservation has evolved so greatly in the last few decades. And we need to keep up with all those changes. And whatever training we received decades ago is always relevant today. So what about the older folk? That's my question as an ambassador of that generation.
Well, what we do is, again, it's built in. So all our programs can get more senior people, and have done. And then the final one of where, once we've got fellows who are more senior, they are, at least in theory, constantly imparting their wisdom, knowledge, what they've learned in kinship. And for example, going back to the example I gave you where we were in Kenya a couple of months ago, where we'd basically, one relatively young fella who's got a great management position had said, I got this problem, I didn't know how to handle it. We could then mobilize the network and say, okay, let's have 6 or 7 fellows work with you on this. And then we were able to bring, actually no, it's 14 able to think about it. Then we're able to mobilize 6 of those people to actually go to Nairobi when a bunch of us were already in Nairobi. Thanks, Fred. And then basically hold a session with the Water Resources Authority, who were a range of very, very young folks, all the way up to senior managers, older than me, who were then able to, you know, get in the framework space of kinship thinking, kinship pillars, leading adaptively, iterating for scale, all this type of stuff. And then we're able to get a 1-day or 2-day workshop focused on the kinship way of solving your current problem, as it were. And this is a new idea. We've never really done this, so it wasn't ideal. But that way of saying, fellows identified a problem, let's get the fellow community on this, and then let's spread what we as fellow communities come up with and why, based on those 6 pillars. I think that has huge potential for any age group, any people get involved. It just depends on that particular case. Everyone in that room was from the Kenya Water Resources Authority, part of government. It wasn't you apply to a program, as it was focused at that demographic. So that will allow all of us to come in. Harshini.
Thanks. Just wanted to share some experience from being a Asia Pacific Leadership Fellow from at the East West Center in Hawaii. Same issue there in engaging all the alumni, and basically what they've currently come up with is a strategy to have regional conferences of the alumni. But this succeeds like the alumni conferences, like the worldwide global alumni conferences that they have every 2 years. Seeing that not everyone can actually make it to those conferences because it's held somewhere around the world and not everyone can actually access those. Now they've taken the strategy of the regional conferences, which are, I think, proving to be much more effective. So, yeah.
Yep. And visas are often easier if you stay in your own region.
Thanks. It definitely sounds like there's a useful discussion in Kruger on alumni, which, yeah, I'd be dead keen to participate in. I'm aware we're at the top of the hour now. We've already lost a couple of people. So I think I'm just going to round up and say a huge thank you to Nigel for an amazing presentation, which is now on record as I've recorded this. I'll just remind you all that the next peer learning session is at 3 p.m. BST on the 11th of June, and that's the Conservation Resilience Fund by Fauna and Flora. We are still looking for more, so if you'd like to offer a peer learning session to help others understand about your programs, please do email me and we can book that in. A huge thank you to all of you for attending, and I will share the recording after this meeting ends. So thanks and enjoy the rest of your day, however much is left. Lovely to see you all.
Right.
Thanks again to Nigel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.